Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita and I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor Bengaluru, India. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. I would now like to welcome Liam and Vivek, our speaker for today's session. Liam works at Microsoft as a cloud advocate for Reactor London. He also holds a number of professional cloud certifications and was previously part of a team that reached the global finals of IBM Call for Code with an AI project. Our next speaker, Vivek, is a tech enthusiast and an open source contributor with around 15 years of experience in the software industry. He works at Microsoft as a senior cloud advocate. But before we start today's session, I would request all of you to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. With this, I would like to hand over the floor to Vivek to start the session. Over to you, Vivek.
Hey Rashmita, thanks for the introduction. Hey all, I'm Vivek, senior cloud advocate, and I'm part of the cloud and AI engineering team of Microsoft. And welcome to my show, Azure Happy Hour. This has been almost like 2 years now. We have been running the show every Friday, and we talk about Azure integrations, open source on Azure, and we speak about a lot of fun things you can do with Azure. And today, Liam is here to teach me how to build a serverless app and how to use Azure Functions to build a serverless app. And we're going to learn a lot about triggers and some of the things which is very specific to like the database triggers and other things which I haven't worked on. So this is something also a learning for me too. So I'll be bugging Liam with a lot of questions, and I expect audience to ask a lot of questions to us so that we can learn from you. You can learn from us. That's what Azure Happy Hour is all about. And Liam, welcome to my show, Azure Happy Hours, and thanks for being here. Please introduce yourself. Let us know today's agenda, and I'm sure we will be spending a lot of time in questions as well.
Of course. Thank you so much. Yes. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you, Vivek, for having me on your show. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can all see some slides. I'm going to keep it like this because I got a pretty big monitor, and hopefully it'll go too small otherwise. So my name is Liam Hampton. I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft here in the UK. I was previously at IBM as an advocate, and I got professional experience as a software engineer as well. Mostly in Golang, but today you lucky folk are going to see me write or play with a bit of JavaScript. I can see Vivek smiling there, yes. Right then, so I'm going to run through a couple of slides. So on the agenda, we've got the deployment history, so where we've come from to where we are now. And it's actually quite fantastic if you break it down. What serverless really is, some use cases for it, and a lovely demo at the end. So deployment history, where did we all start? So it all began with physical servers. So bare metal in data centers, on-premise, physical servers which you go and plug cables into and play with as a network engineer or as a software engineer. Then moved quickly to virtual machines, and that's either, again, it could be at a data center on-premise, or some of them were actually in the cloud. And this was all this migration across to packaging up operating systems and pieces of code, and really being able to deploy that more quickly and save more money, be more cost efficient. Then we kind of, over the past couple of years, we've shifted into containers, and this is all about packaging up your code in like a virtualized environment and then deploying it anywhere, removing that kind of saying, and this is so cliche, it works on my machine but doesn't work on yours. And it kind of helped eliminate that. And some technologies around that was Docker and Kubernetes, and I mean, they're still very popular at the moment. That then leads us into serverless. So as you can see, we've come from physical servers to serverless, and each time it has got a little bit more modular. So everything's been broken down. Everything's been a little bit more granular, more fine grain in deployments. So what is serverless? Well, sorry to spoil it for you, but servers are still involved. It is very misleading, this name, but it's cool nonetheless. It really is good fun.
So Liam, just go back one slide. So I just want to share a story here.
Go for it.
While 15 years back, the way we were working, especially in IBM when I was working, the way we used to go and set up the servers and the productions were in one of the rooms where it is too cold to go. You have to wear jackets and go in and then install stuff there. Those were the physical servers which we had. And after that, obviously, VMware ESX servers came in, but it was still private. It was still private and it was still private cloud. We were removed out of the jackets, but still we were still using the private cloud, right? And then we and obviously from there, shift happened towards infrastructure as a service and PaaS layers and other things. But still, while we used infrastructure, we still had to make sure we managed that infrastructure, like patching it and other doing stuff like that. And even the PaaS layer, you need to control the size and other things. Like even the PaaS layer, you have to mention which is your size, what is your infrastructure sizes, and you have to make a decision on all that. It is still not too agile, but yeah, serverless made it easy, right? So that's where you don't have to be worried about availability, scalability, or reliability, anything. So that's what the history is all about. So I'm just telling my history through these years with all these different technologies I've been using from last 15 years. So that's amazing.
No, 100%. It's always good to get everyone, other people's opinion on this, because it is great to see the modular approach to it now and where it's came from and sort of how quickly it's happened, because people don't realize that we're only talking about a decade or two where we've come from having nothing to everything open source, serverless functions, everything on the fly. No, it's fantastic to hear. So moving into what serverless actually is, and like I said, servers are still involved. So I've grabbed this from the Azure documentation or the docs online, but really what to take from this is the cloud service provider manages the infrastructure, which means as a developer, as you and I, we're writing code, that's all we care about. So we will put that into the cloud, and the cloud will then, or the service provider will sort of manage everything that happens beyond it. So scaling, the availability, really what's happening under the covers. So why should we use it? Well, what's going on here? So it's resource efficient for starters. And by that, I mean, it's just a pay-as-you-go service. You pay for what you use, and it's more modular than containers, like I said. So you're not paying for a container to be stood up on a server. You are just paying for the execution time of a function, which, getting more down to that granular level is a little bit more efficient for short tasks. Super scalable, because the cloud deals with all of that. As long as you allow the cloud service provider to do it, it will scale up for as much as you want. So imagine you've got a website and thousands and thousands of people are hitting it at a time. You're getting so many requests. You don't have to worry about it. It's just your function. The cloud deals with everything else. Super speedy. In most instances, you actually get a sub-second or sub-1 second response time. Again, depending on what you're doing and what your architecture really is all about, but usually you get a really super fast response. And finally, it's event-driven. Like I mentioned with the resources, you only pay for what you use because you're only calling it on an event. And that leads me to the other side. A lot of people leave this out because everyone sort of screams about the goodness about tech, but no one really sort of what's the bad side to it. It's really not ideal for long running processes. At some point, the graphs will kind of cross over in the middle and it will start costing more money for the efficiency that you're getting. Not so much a problem anymore, but vendor lock-in certainly has been talk of this in the past. Serverless is still pretty new. This has been going on for the past, maybe 5 years, maybe 2014, I think, was the first one that came out. I think that was Lambda functions on AWS. And I think Azure came in at 2016 with GCP, so GCP Google Cloud. But it was very much talk about vendor lock-in and going down a rabbit hole and finding it really difficult to get out once you're in. However, that's not so much the case anymore. And today I'm actually going to prove that wrong in my demo. Second, another one which I'm going to prove wrong with Azure Functions, but testing can be sometimes difficult. And this is because as a developer, you're focusing on the code and not really caring about the underlying infrastructure. But it gets to a point sometimes where you're unfamiliar with what's going on behind your module. So let's take Node, for example. I'm not a Node developer. I'm a Go developer. So I know the ins and outs of how the functions execute. Everything is sort of working under the covers in Go. But with Node, when you're exporting a module, that's all you're writing. But outside of that module, I don't really know kind of what's going on to a certain extent. And as a developer, I think you still kind of need to know that. So when you're testing, you need to be able to stand up the framework around it locally. You need to be able to understand what's going on around it to be able to test it efficiently. So that can sometimes be difficult if you don't know. And finally, cold starts. And this is, again, not so much a problem anymore, but it has been in the past. Like I said, servers are still very much a thing in serverless. So if you can think about it, you're running a process, you want to start it up for the first time. If it's running idle, you're going to have that getting going state. So it might take a few seconds longer than you'd expect if you're running it for the first time for the day. And it's not just function as a service, so FaaS. There are other services available in Azure and again with other clouds as well. But Azure, we have Azure Kubernetes Service, so AKS. We've got Azure App Services and Cosmos DB. And it's not just sort of tied to databases and compute services. This is across the whole spectrum. So there's CI/CD pipelines, services. You've got lots of different things in Azure which are on a serverless infrastructure. So again, it's not just functions. And if you really want to read more about it, there is a link there. I think in Teams you can probably, can you copy that, Vivek? Can people copy that?
I can anyways copy that and paste it in from the site. Not an issue.
Yes, fantastic. So
one thing there
okay.
we need to know here is the difference between the serverless and functions as a service, right? Sometimes people get confused in terms of understanding the people usually think that serverless is always Azure Functions or functions as a service. It's a code and I need to run, but serverless is a technology. And it's basically the Azure Kubernetes Service also provide you on the fly all the features of serverless technologies. And as Liam told, Azure App Service and Cosmos DB also provide all those kind of services. So that's about it. So functions as a service is basically a platform to code and code your app. That's what we are doing today. But there are other services which are on their serverless technologies.
Yeah, 100%. And I think one thing to take away from this is this meaning of scaling down to zero, where you don't have something stood up all the time. And that's pretty much the crux of serverless, where it is event driven and it's not running over the course of a whole day. It's just if and when you need it. So yeah, you're quite right. Function as a service and serverless, similar, also quite different fundamentally. So some example use cases, and this is where you may see it used often or spoken about, or maybe yourself has even played with it. So we've got CI/CD pipeline functionality and triggers. So whether it's a trigger that kicks off a pipeline, so if you push to GitHub, you push your code, you may be kicking off a GitHub action, for example. That's event driven. So that would technically be on a serverless architecture. Whether it's inside your CI/CD function, so when you're running through your pipeline and you want to go off and start something outside to kick off another function or something else, again, very similar situation. Chatbots is another really good one, and I like this one because it's a perfect example of serverless architecture. Let's imagine we have a dormant website which has a chatbot on it, and not many people visit this website. Not many people are going to be talking to the chatbot. Why would you stand up a server with all of this code just waiting for somebody to talk to it. You wouldn't. You would sort of do all your pre-processing of your data. You would then let the serverless functions take over. It's event driven, so that when if somebody visits the website and if they decide to talk to you through the chatbot, it can then run the piece of code and respond. So you can kind of see how that's more efficient than having something stood up idle waiting for somebody to talk. Thirdly is mobile backends, and this is probably one of the most popular use cases because your mobile phone is not a server. So it doesn't have the power that you might have in a laptop or a sort of deployed server in a data center or a cloud data center. So again, it's very much event driven. You're going to be using these APIs from your phone and calling the functions elsewhere. And finally, batch jobs. Again, another really, really popular one and one of my favorites because it's a perfect example. If you have a batch job of tests which take 30 minutes to run and you run this once a day, that's 30 minutes of 24 hours. So for the other 23 and a half hours, you're going to be doing nothing. So why would you stand up a server or a container and have something running for 23 and a half hours doing nothing when you only got 30 minutes of execution time? So a perfect example of this to use serverless jobs in this instance, or serverless architecture, if and when you need it and only for the time you need it. Kind of segues nicely into where I'm going to be going with this. And this is a traditional e-commerce site. You have a 3-tier architecture, so a client, server, and a database. And that's going to be maybe the front end, the business logic, and where the data is stored. And they all talk to one another. So, for example, you may have a React or Angular front end, or an Apache server, or Node Express, or something like that. And then you may have, one of the popular databases, Postgres or MongoDB, or in my instance, I'm going to be using Cosmos. But you can kind of see where this goes. This is kind of the MERN LAMP kind of stacks that you're going to be playing with. Very traditional sort of bundles of technology put together that work well together. However, I'm going to be taking a serverless approach on this. And let's say we have a React front end. So that's our client. And that server, which is back here in this slide, can be broken down into modular parts, which I have broken down into functions. So you may have a function which deals with adding an item to the cart, or adding a new item to a catalog if you're an administrator, or a payment provider. So say you want to pay for your products in your cart, not everyone's going to be paying all the time. It's just going to be if and when you have items you want to buy. So again, serverless architecture. So you may have functions which do this, and they will call out to the database, and the database will talk to them, vice versa. So I've candidly put some inkles on here as to what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be playing with the React front end, a Azure Functions function to deal with the catalog service, and a Cosmos DB database. So to do that, the steps I'm going to be taking, I'm going to create the function. I'm going to deploy it into the cloud. I'm then going to create a Cosmos DB database. I'm going to bind the function to the database, and then I'm going to call the function from a React application. So for those who don't really know what Cosmos DB is, it is actually a NoSQL database with a bunch of APIs in it. And they are, I think you've got Mongo, you've got Cassandra, Gremlin, which I think is a graph database API, and you've got tables. So you've got table data storage as well. So you kind of get the power of a NoSQL database with the power of SQL, should we say, or another service. The tools I'm going to be using for this is an Azure account, which I've logged into. I've got Node.js installed on my local machine so I can create the code and sort of run it locally. Going to need VS Code and the Azure extensions, the Azure Functions core tools, and I'm using 4 points, whatever I've got on my machine. And I have made a mistake in my slide there. Ignore number 5 there. Let's just delete that one. There we go. So that's what I'm going to be doing in my demo, which leads us over to demo time. Do we have any questions? It's a good time to sort of pause and answer any questions that are in the chat.
Yeah, so so what we are going to do is, just correct me if I'm wrong, Liam. So we are going to build an e-commerce site, and we will have a couple of functions created, and these functions are triggered. So basically it is triggered. You will use a trigger, and so ultimately what we are going to use is the Azure Functions programming model, the to build this app with the serverless technology. So the programming model comes with a couple of things, right? It has triggers, and it gives you a platform to build that kind of architecture and how you can go back and execute this. And then we have Cosmos DB at the bank. Is that right?
Yep, certainly. So if I was to open up Chrome, I've kind of cheated a little bit here.
There is a question as well, just before we go there. So there is a question that, are we going to see functions for post and put?
We are going to see functions for post and get.
Perfect.
So we can go on, carry on.
So there is a question on, is this similar to a microservice architecture? You can call it yes, because we have 3 different functions, and yes, we can do that. And when do you choose functions over a simple API hosted in a container or a web app?
Again, it depends how much you really want to do. So for this one, I am just doing one thing and I'm doing it really well. I'm going to be creating a document in a database and I'm going to be getting the data from the database. So it's really up to you whether you use containers and you want to go through, packaging everything up and dealing with that, or whether you want to sort of leverage the power of the cloud provider and this architecture as to whether you just want to write a little bit of code. And to be honest with you, there is very little code involved in this.
Yes, and also it is based on the event. So those might not be based on event. The web app might be just package and you're running it. But these functions you design is based on the event, that whether you are doing an add to cart, that is an event, and when you run that, that's when the function gets invoked. So those are the couple of things which you can think about. So let us go and do the demo and take questions after the demo as well.
Yeah, okie dokie. So I've kind of cheated a little bit and I've already deployed a React application in Netlify. So remember in my slides I said vendor lock-in was not so much a thing. Proven that true to be here now, because this is in Netlify completely outside of the Azure bubble. And this is just a catalog addition form, should we say. So if I was to put in, I don't know, a chair, and let's say it was £100 and it's a great chair. If I want to create that, it's not going to do anything. It doesn't reload. And likewise, if I try and get items from the database, it's not going to do anything. So in this demo, I'm actually going to be creating the backend functions needed for that. So I'm going to go and open up a new VS Code window. And like I said, for this one, I'm going to go to the Azure extension. And I'm going to see all my lovely possibilities I can play with, or services I can play with in Azure. But for this one, all I care about is functions. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Please do say something if you can't see my screen very well or my code if it's too small, and I'll just make it bigger. But as you can see, I'm logged in. I've got nothing, no functions in my subscription. So I'm going to go and create a local function. And I'll do that by clicking on that little folder icon. Let's go and put it in some serverless functions. Let's create a new folder in here and say Azure Happy Hours demo. And let's create this one. So it's just completely separate from everything else. I'm going to create a JavaScript function. So as you can see here, we've got TypeScript, C#, Python, Java, PowerShell, custom handler. So you can create ones in Go and other languages that don't have a build pack, but it's a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to stick with JavaScript. I'm going to be using a HTTP trigger. So as you can see, there's a whole load of these down here, but I'm not going to use the Cosmos DB trigger itself because that listens to the feed. So if there's a sort of a change in the database, that's when it would trigger something. I actually want to be creating and reading from the database. And this is kind of breaking it down a little bit further. So I'm going to call it, let's call it Azure Happy Hour or Happy Hours demo. So I'm just going to call this my function name. I'm going to give it anonymous authorization because you can add function level auth or you can have admin auth, but I want everything to hit this, so I'm going to use anonymous. I'm going to add that to my workspace. So it's probably just going to open up in VS Code a new workspace and sort of have it all contained for me. Awesome. And you see how quick that was? It's created as a boilerplate code, which prints out, what is this, a message. There's a ternary statement in JavaScript. For those that don't know what a ternary statement is, it's just an if-else, just a really quick way of writing it. It's going to take a name. It's going to, if there is a name, it's going to say hello and put the name in the output, or it's just going to print a string. And it's just going to give back a body in the response. So if we go ahead and run that, actually, before I do that, let's have a quick look at what all of this is on the side. So we got function.json, which has got all the bindings. So this is a object with an array in it of bindings, just to let you know exactly what you've chosen. So like I said, you can do this through the palette, like I just did, or you can create these functions and this whole directory yourself. I choose to do it the easy way because you can miss stuff quite easily doing it this way. You got the index.js, which is your function. So as I was saying in my PowerPoint or my presentation, my slides, module.export, this is what you do in Node when you want to sort of abstract a function outside of where you're sort of running everything else. But that's where the danger falls if you're unsure about what's going on with the language. It's at the base level. It creates a Git directory for us. So you can push this to Git. And there's like a bunch of other things in here, package.json and host.json, which sort of shows you extension bundles, the version you're running. I'll try and get everything out of the way there. And yeah, just kind of lets you know what's what. So I mentioned that we need the Azure Functions core tools, and that is because it's going to help simulate running this locally as if I would in the cloud. So if I just open up this one.
So Liam, one quick question here. So the structure which you have, the code structure, is that specific to the language which I have chosen, right? So So if I go back and choose Java, so Java project, while creating the function, the code structure will be different. It will have different.
I think so, yes, because it's all how the build pack is running this in the cloud itself. To be honest with you, I haven't actually tested that personally. However, it's very similar after trying it with Go. It's all this top level thing. So you got your function ignore, your git ignore, the host .json, which is kind of like your local settings. Again, you have local settings here, which is just telling you what's going on, your runtime. So it's all very similar. It's not too different. But yeah, I believe obviously for different language, I think there will be something different going on.
Got it.
Alrighty. So if I run this locally, I'm just going to press F5 on my keyboard, which should spin up the developer tools locally. Wonderful. So it's all started. And we can just see the output in my console. It's given me, or it told me that I've got a function. It's built. I'm ready to call it. It can take a GET and a POST request as an API. It's kind of like a REST API, this. And here's your URL. So there's two ways you can call this. We can call it from the URL, or we can do it within VS Code itself by finding the function in the sidebar, clicking on function. And as you can see, it's just taken the or it knows that the package code is here in my workspace, and I can call it from here. So let's go and call it from the URL because it's probably the most visual. It will open up like this. And OK, brilliant. So I haven't actually passed a name in. So if I want to go and add a query parameter and I say Liam, you can see how that response has changed and how that ternary statement is sort of running true now. Now I've passed, it says hello Liam, as opposed to not saying that in the first instance. So it just says this HTTP trigger function, etc. And again, we can run that from inside VS Code by right-clicking on the function and clicking execute function now. And again, I can let's just take the command palette default and say the name is Azure in the body. And you can see here in the output of VS Code, it has spat out, hello Azure, this HTTP triggered function executed successfully. So fantastic, it's working. That's all wonderful. So let's push this to the cloud. Let's publish this to Azure. So all I'm going to do is click this little cloud button up here in the sidebar. And because I don't have anything in Azure already, I'm going to create a new function app in Azure. And again, I'm just going to call it the same thing. So Azure Happy Hours demo. And as you can see, I haven't got anything in my Azure subscription called that, so I can call it Azure Happy Hours demo. I'm going to choose node 16 because that's what I'm running locally. So if I want to, if I just quit this down here and open up a terminal, I can see that I'm running node 16 by typing in node -v into a terminal, and it'll tell me that's what I'm running. It's available in the cloud. I mean, it says it's in preview, but so far with my testing, it's been working fine. Just whatever you're running locally is suffice. The location, I'm going to use UK South, and this is all about where you are in the world because, or I say not where you are, but sometimes resources might not be available in certain locations. But for this example, I can choose UK South as I know it is here, but I wouldn't choose Australia East because, well, that's the other side of the world. That's going to create a little bit of latency, probably not noticeable to me, but always be thinking about that when choosing your location. Price as well. Price is an important factor here. And it's going to go off and create an app service plan for me. It's going to create the function app. It's going to create, for those of you who may know Azure, it's going to create a resource group for me under the covers because I don't have one. And as you noticed, I didn't select one there in that palette. And it's just going to deploy all of this to the cloud for me. And we're going to just wait a second for this to load up. I can close my terminal because I do not need that open anymore. Yeah, I mean, probably this is going to be like a lot of to and fro in this demo because there's quite a bit of deployment. So please feel free to ask questions while it's deploying, and I can try and answer them as we go. Do we have anything in the chat, Vivek?
Yeah, I've shared the extension link and also function Azure functions code tools link as well. So there is a CLI code tool link, where Liam is using to build in locally, right? As he showed, right? While he built it locally, the function code tools was installed on his laptop. So that's one of the link which I've shared how you can get started with it. And is there any questions? So is it Azure Function 1.6? So the ideally latest one looks like 4. The core tools.
Yep.
That's something which you should take a look at it. Is there any other questions we have?
It could be anything related to this, anything related to me, Microsoft.
So where do we set port numbers and basic code? So that's where he had Jason.
Yep. So when you set your port numbers, I think you can do that ad hoc. But again, this is very much, as a developer, you don't care about that. So remember, you're just writing the code. So you don't necessarily care about the port number. The cloud provider should deal with all of that by itself. So I wouldn't worry too much about that one. If you're writing serverless like this, and I'm sure I can sort of dig into that later after the demo. Okay, so as you can see on my screen, it says deployment to Azure Happy Hours has been complete. So if I click on get the output, you'll see that I now have a link to my function. So this function, if I open it up in a browser again, hey presto, it is now running. So it's no longer running localhost, which is what this tab is. If I close that one, you can see I'm running in the cloud, which is brilliant. However, that's still super basic, and that's not really what we're here for. We're here to build the backend to our service. And this is where it gets pretty cool, because I'm now going to create a database. So we're going to put function aside for a minute. We can make a change and everything afterwards, but we need to know where we're storing the data, what we're going to be creating, and how. So again, in the sidebar of the Azure extension, we've got databases, and I've got my subscription here. And if I open it up, I've got nothing in my subscription for a database. So I want to right-click on that, and I'm going to click Create Server. Now, as you see, we've got like a whole bunch of different services here. So like I said, we've got SQL, you've got MongoDB API, you've got Table, you've got Graph, Postgres, and so forth. For this, I'm going to use Core SQL. And I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to give it Azure Functions Demo DB. because that's just going to make the most sense to me. That's going to be the service name. I'm going to choose serverless because this is a serverless. No, I'm joking. I'm choosing serverless because I don't want any provisioned throughput. You do get that if you want to, but I want it to be on an ad hoc, on sort of like a provisioned basis. So, sorry, a non-provisioned basis. I want to just be able to call it if and when and have it execute when I want it to. So I'm then going to use Azure Happy Hours demo resource group. So like I mentioned when it created the function, it created one for me without me sort of needing to specify. So I can collect that or select that one. Again, it's going to ask me where I want it to be located. I'm going to use UK South because that's where I'm based and I know it's available here. So it's going to go off and create the service. Now, this isn't necessarily a database. This is just a service that it's creating. And then underneath it, I can choose to create a new database and sort of which one and sort of how I go about that, I get to select. But whilst we're waiting, we could have a little look at this code in the function. So what have we got here? This message doesn't make much sense to us anymore. So I'm actually going to change that, and I do actually have something I can drop in. So I'm going to paste in a different message, like so. And all this message is going to say, hello, this HTTP triggered function executed successfully, and you have added name to the database, because this is what we're doing, right? So this is the beginnings of our form. Otherwise, it's just going to say, it triggered, it executed successfully, and it's just going to add the items to the database, and it's going to be in the body of the query string. What else we got? We're going to want to add some new variables into here. So we're going to add a price and a description, because on our form, if you remember, we have got a price and a subscription on the React app. But that's wonderful because, okay, we can have them. What are we going to do with them? So I'm actually going to wait for this to finish deploying, because then we're going to actually play with these variables. I'm going to put it into a little statement, and it's going to sort of connect to the database once it's up, and it's going to then be able to insert it when we test it. So I'm just going to wait for it to deploy. It does take a moment, and it's not my most favorable. But hey, that's all part of cloud, right? These things take time.
Yeah. So there is a question in the chat. So
yep.
It's about how do you use third-party libraries from NPM? So in the code, if you go to the code base, where you can provide the different NPM packages details. I think it's in the package.
That is a really good question. Yep. So it'll be in the package and the package.json, and you'll be able to import them as long as it's done properly through your code. You should be able to. So things like, I don't know, what have we got in JavaScript, like the time libraries and things like that people like to play with. Yeah, you can add them in. Just got to do it within here, and it'll be in your package and your package.json as to sort of what goes where. Okay, so that deployed, that service has been created, and this is actually now the quickest bit of the database, because if I right click and I want to create the database in here, so as you can see, we've got an account. Let's create database, and I'm going to call this again Azure Functions Demo DB. It just makes the most sense to me to call the database the same as the service. It sort of helps me later on when it comes to sort of connecting them together. The collection ID, which is where I want my details on my bits of data to be stored. So I'm going to call it Azure Functions Demo Collection. So if you remember, this can be a document database, and that's exactly what I want. For this one, the partition key for the collection, I'm going to put /ID. And this is really interesting. Some people sort of might get a bit confused with this one, but this is how you want to split up your data inside your database and how you want to grab it and what you want to do with it afterwards. But I'm going to use /ID for this. So I'm going to have sort of like an ID part of my data. And that has gone and created a collection inside the database. So it's created this. So this is my database. I can create separate collections, and yeah, it's there. It's fantastic. It's so quick. Let's just come out of this one Let's close the terminal in a minute and go back to here. What's next on here? So next we actually want to grab the connection string. So what do we want to do? We want to right click on the service and copy connection string. And this is just going to allow me to connect my function to my database. Right then. So we want to click F1 at this point, and this is where we want to add a new setting. And this is going to be put into my local settings so I can sort of connect everything up. I'm going to choose my Azure Happy Hours demo, which is my function. And I'm going to the app setting name, which for this is Cosmos DB connection string. So that's everything I need to put in there. At this point, I am then going to put the value for this. So I'm going to paste in my connection string, and this thing caught me out so many times. And it's cost me quite a bit of time, but there is actually at the end of this, there is a semicolon to break up the data. And that is very much one of those cases where I spent about 3 hours trying to figure out what I had done, why it wasn't connecting, and what was going on. And I just missed out that one semicolon. And
it's always about the semicolons. It's always about semicolons, right?
Oh, it is every single time. Yeah. Yeah, it's annoying, but it's good fun. So second to that, I'm then going to want to download the remote settings so I can add that to my function. So when I'm ready to do the binding. So again, I want to click my Happy Hours demo, which is my function. And at this point, I'm going to click yes to all. I want to overwrite all of my local settings so it's all consistent within this workspace. As you can see there, it has done it successfully. All the function settings have been sort of downloaded, and we're ready to go. At this point, I'm now going to want to connect the function to the database. So remember, we want to use this function to create something. So as I've written in my function here, we have got a new message. We've got some sort of variables which I want to sort of add into the database as part of some data. So let's go to our function code. And I'm going to right click on functions or look in functions.json because this is where the bindings are kept in this instance. So as you can see, we've got this array, which has got some objects in it, letting us know the settings of the function. I right click on functions.json, and then I'm going to click add binding. And this is super important because this needs to make sure it is out. It's an outward facing binding. And that's because we're creating data in the database, whereas an inward facing binding is reading from the database. So that's like the core difference here. So I'm going to select out. And again, we've got a Cosmos DB instance. So I'm going to click Cosmos DB. I'm going to call it output document, and this is why I haven't written the code function yet inside my index.js, because this is how I reference the binding. This is what I'm going to call it from the code when I do sort of like bindings.output document and then how I'm going to connect to it. I'm not going to call it out database though. I'm going to give it the name of my actual database because that's where I want to connect to. And again, collection. The collection name of where I want to store my data is functions demo collection. And just to reiterate, it's just down here. So these two here, database and the collection inside the database itself. Click enter. So this is then going to ask me, do I want to create a database and a collection? Well, no, I don't, because I've already made one and I've showed you how to do that. So it can go off and do it automatically for you, but I would rather have more control and do it myself. So I'm going to click false. Here, I'm going to use this connection string that I created. Cosmos DB connection string, that is what I want to use to connect to my database, and that's in my local settings JSON. And I'm going to leave the last two things. So partition key, I'm just going to leave it as blank. And the connection throughput, I'm going to leave it as blank. They're optional. If you have those, if you want to set them, you can. I'm just not going to. And then I click enter. And as you saw on my screen really quickly, it populated functions.json with a new binding inside the bindings array. As you can see here, like I said, you can do all this manually if you like, but it just prevents errors happening. It prevents you from missing things out if you do it through the palette like I just did. So let's just remove these two empty parts in there because we don't want them. They're not doing anything. They're no good to us. Awesome. So now we've got our binding between our function and our database. But now we need to code something to add some data to the database. So if I go to my index.js, so as you can see, I've got a name, I've got a better string, I've got a price and a description. And they're all going to come from the request body or the query parameter, whichever one you want to say. OK, so now I'm going to have a little if statement inside there, and I'm just going to paste that underneath it. And this is all the code. Well, besides 2 more lines that I need to add, this is the main part of it. So it's going to say if there is a name, or if I've entered a name in a query string in the body, I'm going to call context.bindings.output.document, which is this lovely binding over here. So the name of the binding. And then I'm going to stringify some JSON to plug it into my database. So I'm going to add an ID, which is a date stamp. I'm going to add a name, a price, and a description. So as you can see, all of these variables are now being used. The final thing that I need to do, because this is what has caught me out, and I'm sure it's caught a number of front-end developers out in the past, is there's some cause issues that I ran into when creating my application. So I'm actually going to replace the body with a response message, just with these little bits of code here, and that's just a status of 200. Although it defaults, I just want to be absolutely certain that it goes straight to 200. The body is still going to be the response message, so it's still going to be this one over here. And the headers, I'm going to allow the origin. I'm going to allow everything because this has caught me out a number of times. Cool. So what we can do now is we have written all the code that we need to populate something in the database or populate a document in the database. Let's go and test it, shall we? And let's hope that this works. So I'm going to run the local tools, and hopefully we should get a lovely load of green and white, which I do. I've got my URL up here, and hey presto, it's running. So if I right click on my function locally and I put execute function now, let's just put in a bit of data. So let's add in, so what did we add? We added a price, and that price was, let's just say £200 or rupees or dollars or whatever you want it to be. I haven't prefixed it with a currency sign. What else we got? We have a description. Ooh, let's make sure that's spelled correctly. And I'm going to say, this is a great cloud. So we got a name, price, and a description. This is a great cloud. And if I click enter, hopefully that should trigger and execute perfectly. Okay, fantastic. So we've got some output. And it said, hello, this HTTP triggered function executed successfully, and you have added Azure to the database. Okay, so now's the moment of truth. If I go and reload my database panel, hopefully, fingers crossed. Hooray, we've got Azure in the database. As you can see, we've got an ID, a name, a price, and a description. That is fantastic. So let's have a quick look at that code once more. Let's move this and let's kill the local tools because we don't need them. Remove that. And all we've added, besides the boilerplate code, was a new message, 2 more variables, and an if statement with, a cause, a header to allow some cause. But you don't necessarily need that. That's just for my application that I'm running. So we've got it. We've got it working. We've got writing to the database working. And what we're going to do is publish that to Azure so that we get a sort of a public URL. So if I click this little cloud button again, make sure everything's saved. So I'm just going to double check that's all saved. Click this one. I'm then going to click the service which I created. So Azure Happy Hours Demo. And then I'm going to click, are you sure you want to deploy this? I am sure. So I'm going to click deploy. This should hopefully run a little bit quicker than the previous one because I'm not creating the app service plan. I'm not creating a resource group or anything like that. I'm just deploying the function to overwrite what's currently up there. Do we have any questions so far?
Nothing yet.
Fantastic.
So if you have any, questions, keep posting.
Awesome. So we have actually deployed it to the cloud. So here's the fun bit, because I'm going to now connect this to the front end, which was the React application that we saw. So as you can see here, we've got the URL for the public facing function. If I look in my service plan over here, I'm going to have the function in the cloud. So what I can do is I can right click on this function and I can copy the function URL. If I go to my application, so let's just say there is a lovely Teams bar at the top covering my tabs. So if I go to Netlify, if I look in my my site, so if I go to, let's just reload that to make sure I'm still logged in. If I go to site settings and I go to build and deploy, again, this is just a Netlify thing. If I go to environment, edit the environment variables, this is the post URL. So if I add in some value here, this is my URL to my function, and I click save. Now all I want to do is go and redeploy my application in Netlify. And this is just a really quick React app. It would take hopefully no more than sort of 30 seconds to a minute. And I can't play a game here, but I'm not going to because I don't want to embarrass myself in front of everybody on a stream. It's like a tile game. It's good fun. And I can never do it in time.
There is a question.
I can never do it.
There's a question, Liam. Yeah, so the question is, can we use simple SQL queries instead of using binding? Like instead of using bindings, can I directly connect to my database? Any database, it could be.
Of course you can. Of course you can. And that's a really good question because you've jumped the gun. I've still got something else to show you after this one. Yeah, love it.
And there is one more question basically. How many servers are we using exactly? So yeah, let's say Azure Functions.
I can show you straight afterwards. If I jump into here, if I look into, this is my Azure portal, and if I jump into my resource group, I'm using a number of them. So we've got some analytics, so application sites, we've got a storage account, a function app, a database, and the service plan. That is it. Just, what is it, a handful? 5? That's how many I'm using. So let's go to my site. Let's go and have a little look and let's add something to the database. So let's add a desk. Let's call it £150. And I'm going to say this is a sturdy, I can't type, a sturdy desk. And I click create. Item has been submitted successfully. Fantastic. So if I have a little look inside my database, hopefully we'll see a desk. And I don't know why I've got DDD there. I think somebody else must have done that. Because yes, you are right. It's a public URL. Please don't batter it. Please don't. Because I had a feeling somebody might. I didn't say it, but please don't. So as you can see, we've got a desk. And in here, again, it's got the name, the price, the description. Wonderful. But, and there's a big but, because we still can't get our items. Nothing shows when I click get items. So let's go and create a get items function. Now, how do we do that? Let's not worry about what's going on in here. Let's close that one down because I'm not too bothered. What I'm going to do is, it's a little bit of a mess in here, isn't it? So we don't need anything to do with the database anymore. So I can close that one down. I don't need any of my my far away functions in the cloud. But what I am going to do is have a little look in my local projects. And instead of creating a new project, so a new project inside its own workspace, I'm going to create a new function inside this one. And I'm going to click the little lightning bolt, which is on this sort of extension. And again, it's going to be a HTTP trigger. And I'm going to call it Azure Happy Hours. I'm just going to call it get. You know, I should have called the other one something better, but I didn't. I'm just going to call this one get. Again, I'm going to have it as anonymous. And hey presto, it's created some boilerplate code. Now, again, I don't care about that one, so I can close that one down. And all this has done is spat out the same thing as it did before, but this one's even better because this one is even shorter. So I'm just going to replace this whole function with something else, and I'll show you exactly what has changed. You see, not a lot changed there, except the input document. Now, if you remember in the previous one, when I was creating my binding, I called it output document. This one I'm now calling input document. And what it's doing is it's going to give me a response in a log. And again, the same headers. It's going to give 200. It's going to have the body of input document. So when I call the database, it's going to grab it, store it in input document as an object, and it's going to pass it out in the response. That is all the code that's needed to get some data from the database. Now I can close my terminal because I don't need that one. That's it. I just now need to add a binding. So again, like before, if I go to my code, as you can see now, it's happy hours demo. That's one function with function JSON, index, and sample dat. And we've got the function number 2, which is Azure happy hours get, function index.js and sample.dat. If I go to the function.json, very similar, I right click and click add binding. This time is the most fundamental difference. It's going to be an inward facing binding because I'm going to be getting data from the database. I'm going to be reading it. So I'm going to click in. And again, Azure Cosmos DB, as that's what we're familiar with, that's what we have. And I'm going to call it input document. Like I just showed you in the code, that's how I'm going to reference this binding and this function. I'm not going to call it in database though. I am going to call it the same thing I've been calling it consistently. My database name, demo.db, demo-db. Again, the collection, which is demo-collection. I'm going to use the same connection string because it's the same collection in the same database, just with a different function. The document ID, I don't care about this. I'm going to leave this one blank. Yeah. I'm going to leave the partition key. I'm going to leave that one blank. But, and big but here, the SQL query is where it comes in. So like you just mentioned, can you use SQL queries? You certainly can. You can write it inside your code, or you can write it like this. So I'm going to do select all from C. And I believe I spelled that correctly. Yep, select all from C. And what that's going to do is it's going to select all the data from the collection. And if I click enter, it's going to add another binding to this array. Again, I can remove the redundants, so I don't care about those. And as you see, I've got all of my bits of information inside that object, inside the array. If I save it, that's going to be fantastic. So again, now all I need to do is test it. Fingers crossed this works. So if I go to my function and I right click on the get function and execute function now, and I'm not going to pass it a body this time, and click enter and it failed. That is because I wasn't running my tools locally. Press F5. And hopefully it will connect this time. Okay, awesome. Oh, brilliant. See, I didn't even need to right click on it. You can just click on this. So as I ran my functions locally, got the tools running, it's giving me 2 URLs. It's giving me the demo and the get. So I'm just going to click on the get because this is going to be more visual actually. If I click on that one, and it should open up locally. And that is working, and it's getting all my data from the database. We have got a Azure document. We've got a DDD, lovely Linux. Yes, you're correct. I didn't put any validation on the form, and desk. So that's all working, which means that I can publish that to the cloud. So again, what I'm going to do is click on the cloud icon with a little arrow, and I'm going to click the same service as the other one that I did previously. I don't want to create another one, like another service. I just want to say the same one, 2 functions in the same service that can talk to each other or use the same sort of, be within the same resource group. And of course, I just want to deploy it. I want to overwrite what's up there. And that won't take a moment. That should only take about 30 seconds. But in the meantime, we can just quickly look over the code again. You can see how little code is really needed to grab data from a Cosmos DB instance here. There really is nothing much to it. It's just the response and grabbing the input document. And that's just grabbing it, storing it in a variable, and spitting it out to the user, or to the function in this instance. The only reason I've added, again, the headers is because I had some cause problems, which is the bane of everybody's life when it comes to front-end development. And I'm not a React developer. Okay, cool. So if we look at the output, should all be there. Wonderful. We've got two functions in the cloud. We've got a demo and the get. So if I look in my subscription over here, same thing as before. If I look at the functions and I right click on the Azure Happy Hours get function, I copy the function URL. I can then paste that into my site settings in Netlify. So let's go to build and deploy, environments, edit the variables. So we've got a get URL over here, paste that one in, click save, and I'm just going to quickly redeploy this. It'll take, again, probably like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And then hopefully we'll see it working on the front end. And this is a really good example of how you can connect a front-end application to some serverless functions in the cloud, talk to a database on the back end, and still sort of have that whole architecture about it. Wonderful. So that didn't take 2 seconds, really. That's deployed. And the reason I'm using Netlify is because this just proves that you're not really getting this vendor lock-in anymore. You've definitely got more to it. So if we click on get all items, hurrah, it has worked. We can add something to the database again. So let's just add a chair. Let's just say it's £400 and great chair. And if I click create, it's added it to the database. If I click get, it's got all the items from the database. And that is how you connect some Azure functions with some trigger bindings to Cosmos DB in a serverless state for a serverless architecture. I hope everybody enjoyed that. I hope you've learned something. And I will be taking this site down, so please don't bombard it.
Definitely, Liam. I think it was amazing, and I learned it quite a bit of thing, how you can, use Cosmos DB in and out binding, and not just while creating a trigger, right? So how you can bind it as well. So this is great. So there are a couple of questions. So let me, and by the way, people who are there, you can, I don't know whether you can unmute and ask questions. We will open the floor while I'm taking a couple of questions, which is already in the chat. So the first question is, can we use the other triggers instead of HTTP triggers, specifically for queue? Is there a trigger for queue? That's the question.
A trigger for queue. What do you mean by trigger for queue? Do you mean a different API?
If I just go over that very quickly, my question was more regarding that. Imagine instead of putting this on a database, you could. So one of the part was that instead of putting this into a SQL query and binding it, you could keep this into a queue wherein you're following a consumer receiver model. And what that 100%. Happens is that if something is in the queue, that's fine, the application keeps on serving. But if it doesn't, it only then starts a trigger and fetches the data from the database, or starts some process, call an API or something. So can there something like that be implemented? And if so, instead of HTTP trigger, you might use something else. So what would that be?
Yes, 100%. You can certainly use it in that kind of architecture. There are triggers available for you to have it in a queue. This is just really depends sort of what your architecture is really looking like. So, for example, this one, rather than having all of this API code inside my React application and deploying that to the site, as you can see, I could switch out, really quickly switch bits of functionality from my React application just by changing and creating some functions. So it really was just like abstracting away from the main sort of product itself. If you're after a queue system, so like pub sub, things like that, yes, that is certainly available in Azure. You would use triggers. There's a whole bunch of them. I'm not entirely sure which one you would use straight off the back. So if I go to create a new function or create a new trigger, so you've got a whole bunch of them in here. There's blob storage, so you can grab things. You've got IoT hub, queue storage trigger, which is what you might be talking about here. You've got a service bus queue trigger again. So yes, 100% you can use them for queues. They can be kind of plugged into any part of your architecture. There's kind of like a trigger for almost everything.
And instead of bound queries, which are pre-populated, can you have dynamic queries? So how would you go about doing dynamic queries?
Yes, you can have dynamic queries. Like I said, you don't have to use all of these pre-populated ones. This is just a really good templating way to show how quickly I can connect a database to an application. Yes, you certainly can. You can do this freehand. You can do it dynamically yourself as well. It's just, for me, it was easier to show in this demonstration how it was working with some templates.
Excellent, thanks.
Most welcome.
So there is a question, one of two questions basically, but I'll take the second one first. One is on how do you debug the standard functions?
Fantastic.
Standard functions used in the code. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic question. And that is the power of having those local tools. So if you remember in the presentation, if I go to it here, the Azure Functions core tools, this is what's actually used in the cloud. So this is like a sandboxed environment for you to have locally on your machine, so you can run the functions as if they're running in the cloud. And it will give you some pretty sort of verbose explanations or error messages if something isn't working with your function, and it is super quick. As you saw, when I tried to run my function locally or try to execute it locally, and I didn't have the tools running, it was pretty sharp saying that this is missing. So yes, it's the same as if you're running or compiling your code at runtime with Node.js. You just get that spit out in your console. It will tell you pretty much down here what's going on after it's done the zip deploy, or if it fails there.
So some of us want to know, where did you host the React web app? So I think the one where you hosted the app, they want to see that again.
Cool. So I actually hosted it in Netlify, and Netlify is just like a really quick deployment. I chose this over Azure to kind of promote the non-vendor lock-in. I could have done this in app services really easily. I could have done this in, I don't know, a container instance. I could have thrown it anywhere really. I just chose Netlify because it's like completely outside the bubble of Azure and is like a really quick deploy. It just grabs the code from GitHub, much like most deployment services now. You can plug in see, here you go, it says deploys from GitHub. Yeah, you can plug in your URL, it'll package it and deploy it for you. Again, I could have run it locally. I could have just done like an npm build, run like a build, local build, but I just chose to show what it's like in a cloud environment, like a, yeah, I'd say about pre-production environment, should we say? Hopefully that answers.
Okay. Yes, but there is one more question. So with the .NET 6, Microsoft shown us how we can build minimal APIs. Functions also look like very simple minimal APIs. Do you think at any point it would be possible to host a .NET 6 minimal API on a serverless platform like Functions? Yeah, I mean, it's minimal APIs is to build the APIs in an application. So it's basically to package it and write it in a shorter format. So what used to happen was in .NET, say in .NET 5, you used to write long code, right, and for various things, and to do a small thing you used to write so much of code. So now the .NET 6 has simplified it, and if you write an API with a very 3 lines code or 4 lines code, you have an API running for you. So that is just a code, and you can use it in functions. You can use it in an app service. You can use it as a containers and package it and use it as a container apps as well. So there is absolutely different ways to use it. So it's not don't confuse with minimal API versus functions, which we have shown you. Functions is a platform and a tool and how you can design your code and release this code to productions.
Thank you,
So there is
Vivek.
one question.
No idea.
I know you are a Go guy, so it's a .NET question. So how to use cloud for an application that has dependencies on .NET DL file storage is on-prem server. So as showcased, you can use different triggers, and you can bind with different databases, and that's what you can do. And if you still feel this has, I mean, there is complication in terms of building it and packaging it and deploying it on serverless, you can always use Azure App Service, and also use container instances, containerize your application and use container instances. That is where, there are obviously Kubernetes services as a higher level of using serverless as technology, right? And the next question is, we have used JavaScript here, right? So can we code using Python for building serverless app?
Yes, you can. There's a number of build packs in Azure. You can use custom language as well. I could have done a Go one, but it's a little bit more complicated to show. And if you're not very familiar with Go, it's a little bit hard to understand. Same with Python. There's a pre-packaged build pack for you, ready to go. So yes is the answer to that.
Yes. So while he created the function, there was list of programming languages it shows, right? So you can choose between these programming languages, and also custom as Liam said. So that's something which you can do as well. So while we are here, and I just want to spend some time on the Learn module, which is associated to this. So I'm going to share my screen so that I hope everybody is able to see my screen.
Yep, yeah, we can.
Yes, there are two Learn modules which are very close to what Liam just showed. So just take a look at those Learn modules. Go and you can play around, and there is a sandbox attached to this, so you don't even have to create an Azure account. There is a sandbox which is there for the first Learn module which is out there, and also you can use a couple of triggers as well. So this is the two Learn modules. There is QR code as well, so make sure that you can use it through QR code as well. You can scan it through QR code. That's something which you can take back. So it's in the chat as well. The link is in the chat. And the next Azure Happy Hour, we have Karan from GitHub team. This is interesting because we want to know what a DevOps company, world's largest DevOps company, do from a DevOps perspective. And it's kind of interesting, like they're going to share their how they do DevOps in GitHub, all the insights and the chat ops and the way they deploy it, the way they manage Kubernetes. So a lot of things will be disclosed by the GitHub team in this show. So don't miss that. So there will be a link. We will post the link to join this event as well. And this is a server link for this particular session. So just go to the server link, key in the event ID, and let us know how was the session was. While you're waiting for most of you to ask questions here, you can go and provide the survey for us and add the event ID there, and let us know how the session was and other things. And I'm just waiting for more questions to come in there. So so Liam, there is a question there.
Yep.
Can I use this as my mini project in my resume? I don't know.
Of
what
course you
does
can.
that mean?
I mean, why wouldn't you? If you want to sort of play with this and have your own little mini project, if you want to create a React app, what I will do actually is I will make sure that the React application, the small form that I've created, is made public on GitHub, and as well as these function codes, which I've created here, I will make sure that it's all in GitHub. Vivek, is there a way to publish links or like a email afterwards to the attendees? Because that would be fantastic. Yep, so I'll make sure it's all public.
Yeah, you can just join the meetup group, which we have, and there is this particular event. We can post the comments in the comment section. So we usually post all the links there after the event. So
Yep.
and I mean, just go back there and check it out. And also the other good thing is you can join us on LinkedIn group. So there is a LinkedIn group where I keep posting all the links which we created, so which we showcased and all those things. So there is a LinkedIn group. So let me share the link. Just give me a minute.
I did already, Vivek.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the LinkedIn group. So please join in, and I'll keep posting all these learn modules or the events which is happening, and also probably new things which is coming up there.
Awesome. I've just posted my LinkedIn in the chat, and my Twitter handle is at Liam C. Hampton, and my GitHub is exactly the same. So you can find me in those two places.
Any other questions we have?
I'll just post my Twitter. There we go. Rashmita, thank you.
Welcome.
No, I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I really hope you all learned something. And it was fantastic presenting. Thank you very much for having me on your stream, Vivek.
Thank you for coming in, Liam. It's always good to share things with the community, and I definitely learned how to bind stuff because I had not done that before. I had done the triggers before, but not the binding. So
Fantastic.
This is a wonderful learning for me as well, and I hope the community also learned a lot of stuff. And thank you everyone for joining in, and do join me next week again. Every Friday we have Azure Happy Hour, so next week we'll be with Karan. So let's catch up then. But if you have any questions, we can still wait for 2 minutes. If you have any questions, we can still answer. Just go on.
Certainly, I mean, I certainly learned a lot of things whilst creating this as well, because databases are not my forte. I'm not a fan. I always kind of try and stay with front end and server, sort of that part of the 3-tier applications. So it's good fun learning about databases, learning how to interact, and how simple it really was for me to sort of create this and have a post and a GET request with a HTTP trigger with Cosmos. It's fantastic services, and all within VS Code as well. There was very little context switching, which I always try to sort of stick to. And hey, fun fact, this was actually my first proper stream as a Microsoft Cloud Advocate. So it's been fantastic.
Wow, thanks for making it. I know and the first stream, obviously there was some glitch at the start, but now I think it's fine.
Yes. I'd love to do this again, and I'll make sure that StreamYard is properly working for me next time. And hopefully this recording will still manage to reach the masses afterwards. So
yep.
Yes, thank you very much, and apologies.
Thank you, everyone.
For switching.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Liam, for such an amazing show. And thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, happy Friday. Have a good weekend.
Happy weekend. Bye.
Bye.